So I was teaching in Bible study Monday. We're in Acts in my Monday night Bible study, and we got to the part on Lydia, and so I was teaching on that she was a seller of purple, if you'll remember. And anyway, I was showing about this guy in the Middle East, and he had recently discovered how to properly harvest those snails. I think I went over this with y'all before. That blue and purple dye that is critical to the Jewish religion, as far as some of their fabrics and stuff that they have to use as part of their worship that God commanded them to do, that they had to have this blue and purple dye, and it comes out of those snails. And so anyway, they didn't know how exactly they harvested those snails for like about 1,500 years. They didn't know how they did it. And so there was this guy, he lived in that area, he was in the Middle East, and he just got fascinated with the thoughts of those, because he knew those snails real well. And he was on his honeymoon, and he saw a bunch of those snails on the seashore. And so he said, I want to see, if I can figure out how to make that blue or purple ink. And so he took them home and he crushed them up in a plastic bag. Nothing. And he knew they got it out of a gland. And so he finally saw the gland in the snail. When he squeezed the gland, the liquid that came out was clear, absolutely clear. And so he had crushed them up in that bag, and he got mad, and he just threw them in the trash and said, well, I guess I'm not going to figure this out. But when he came back the next day to throw some more trash in the trash can, he saw that the bag was purple. And so he started investigating, and 12 years later, let me just skip to that. 12 years later, he figured out how to harvest that gland out of the snail. It was clear when it comes out, but then you have to dry it out in the sun, and however long you leave it in the sun is how dark it gets. So it's either blue, and then it turns to just a beautiful purple. And they would mix salt with it, and then turn it into powder, and that's how they did it. But it would take, and I didn't bring that. No, I didn't. Yeah, I left all that information at home. But anyway, it takes 10 to 12,000. It's Murex snails that lives in the sea. It only lives in that one part of the world. And it takes 10 to 12,000 of these snails to make 1 gram of dye. 1 gram. It's 120 pounds of snails to make 1 gram. And back in the day, in Jesus' day, it was, I think it was 13 times more costly than gold. That it was worth 13 times more than gold in the day. And today it's about 10 times more costly than gold. It's $2,700 a gram today. If you want to buy some from him, he's still harvesting it. But he don't do it much to sell. He makes kits, and he sells mostly to Christians and rabbis. He says he sells the blue to the Christians, the purple to the Christians, and the blue to the Jews. And he's a Muslim, so that's interesting. But anyway, it just got me. She wanted me to talk about that somewhat, so I started looking at. I started looking at some other things too, and I've talked about some of these before. And I'm going to draw them, and do not zoom in, because I can't draw, and I'm not drawing them because I can draw, but I'm drawing them because, again, I could just go through these and talk about them and say what they are, but when I draw them and you see how many it is, then it should make more of an impact to you. But I want you to see. So one thing, what I just talked about, And I meant to bring that, and I forgot to bring it. But that's probably going to be too big. I don't know why I drew that so big, because I got a lot to draw. So this is a tallit, or a prayer shawl. You know, y'all remember me going through the prayer shawl. And you remember, God commanded them for that one tassel. All of the tassels are white, except the one tassel has to be blue. And that it can't just be blue, it has to be blue from that particular snail. And so that's why, if you look at any Jewish people in Israel, at least up until the last probably 5 years, if you look at film or whatever of Jews over there, and you'll see their little tzitzits hanging out from under their shirts, and the little tassels and the little strings. You'll notice that all the strings are white. And it's because the Jews hold the Old Testament Scripture in absolute reverence, so that they won't do anything unless they know exactly they're doing it exactly like the Scriptures say. They didn't know how to get the blue ink that God commanded them to in Leviticus for that one string, and they have it also. They put it, just some of them are elaborate, and they have blue in the tallits too, if you had money, because it's very expensive. But they didn't know exactly how they got that blue ink, so for 1,500 years, they would only do the white tassels. But again, this guy in the last probably 5 to 10 years, he's figured out how to do that blue again. So now that they're putting the blue back into the tassels as Leviticus commands them to do. So there's for the snails, the blue dye, the purple dye too. They use it as well, but not for this purpose. So that's the blue dye. And actually, the article was April 2020, and he said he's having people from all over the world contact him to how to process these snails. Ooh, let me turn that down. So he's having people from all over the world asking him how to process these snails, because there's such a Jewish demand for it now that they can see how they did it in the ancient times. Okay, so that's happened within the last 3 years. Okay, so another thing is, again, my drawings are terrible, so don't mind them. But, huh? So, let's draw two things for this one. So here's the veil of the temple, and this is the high priest garment. And again, they could not reproduce the high priest garment, and they couldn't produce the veil. Does anybody know what color the veil was? Just right offhand. Does anybody know what color it was? Come on, you know what color it is, Ronnie? Just kidding. The veil in the temple.
Oh, purple.
It's crimson. It was crimson. And so the veil of the temple, the Holy of Holies, that had the Ark of the Covenant behind it, it is crimson. And crimson, oh my goodness. I can't write or draw, so crimson. So the veil is crimson, and the high priest's garment was crimson. But again, that's a unique color, and it was a very deep and rich, beautiful color, as the blue was, and the purple. And I'll show you pictures afterwards if you want to see them, because that dye, once you dye something with that dye, It's the most gorgeous purple and blue I've ever seen. I don't think we can manufacture anything to compare to it today. I was blown away by it. But also, they found that dye from the snails, they found garments 2,500 and 3,000 years old. And the longer it sits, and the longer it sits in the sun, the deeper and richer and more beautiful it gets. It never fades. Never. It's amazing. It's miraculous. And obviously, God told them to use it, so there's something special about it. Same thing with the crimson. The Jews did not know how they got this crimson dye for the veil or for the high priest's garment, so they could not produce either one. But in 2022, they were investigating the ancient documents, and they knew about this little rascal, but they didn't quite know how to do it. But they found the crimson worm, which is only over there in Israel's location. There's this crimson worm. It's a beautiful little grub worm. It actually says it's a maggot, but it's huge. It's a beautiful, they call it a crimson worm, and they dry it and crush it to powder, and it gives them this beautiful crimson color. And when Jesus said, "I am a worm," he was actually saying, when you look at the Hebrew, he was a crimson worm. And when I think it was Isaiah said he called himself a worm, again, he was calling himself a crimson worm. And so there's a little more meaning to it than just worm. The crimson worm was the color of blood. It has significance. But anyway, 2022, they figured out how to get this dye that the ancient Hebrews out of the scriptures, because they won't do anything. Again, they will not do anything unless they know for absolute certain this is how they did it in the ancient times, that this is how God commanded them to do it. If they don't know, they just won't do it. Will not do it. So in 2022, again, through tons of study, they figured out how to process this crimson worm to get the dye to do the veil and the high priest's garment. Okay? Now, I've talked about this. This is going to probably be my worst drawing. Well, it wasn't too bad, I don't guess. It don't really look like what I was supposed to look like. I'm going to draw horns on it. So maybe that'll help. No, that made it worse. That's a cow. That's terrible. It does look like it looks like a rabbit. The horn looks like a rabbit ear. I shouldn't have put a mouth on him, but I shouldn't have done. Anyway, this is the red heifer. And we've talked about the red heifer before, but since 1948, as soon as Israel became a nation again, and that was probably the first one I should have drawn, but as soon as Israel became a nation again, they immediately set out to find the red heifer. Because before they can have the temple, before they can have the sacrifice, before they can have any of this, before they can do anything, before they can worship God again, before they can sacrifice again to God, because they can't even have a temple, they can't dedicate the temple, they can't do anything until they get the red heifer. And so they have been looking for this red heifer all over the whole world since 1948. And they found it last year. They have a couple of them, actually a few of them. So they found that in September 2022. I was actually watched them fly it into Israel. It was so exciting because I've been talking about the red heifer for 10 years. And finally there it is, because you really can't understand what a big deal that is. Like, they couldn't do the temple, they couldn't do anything until that rascal was found. And it was found in 2020. Are you starting to see a kind of a theme here? 2020, 2022, 2022. It's kind of crazy, ain't it? This is going to be terrible, but I'm going to draw it anyway. How about I just draw this? There we go. This is just a bunch of people. Okay. So this is just a bunch of people. And what these represent is the Great Sanhedrin. And so you read in the Gospels and the book of Acts, and you'll see a lot of times Sanhedrin. Does anybody know who the Sanhedrin is? They were priests.
Were they judge priests?
They were judge priests. Very good. It was a mixture of Sadducees and Pharisees. Mostly Sadducees, but Pharisees was on the Sanhedrin. 70 is in there somewhere. I can't remember my Hebrew, but maybe the whole word, I don't remember. Maybe Sanhedrin. I don't know. Hedron maybe 70. I don't know. One of those is 70. Somewhere in there is the number 70. But anyway, so it was a group of 70 men in Israel. And as they've already said, they were priests and they were a mixture of Sadducees and Pharisees. And what we would refer to this today in our culture would be the Supreme Court. Except that really they were more than the Supreme Court. They were higher than the Supreme Court because they were the law of the land of all of Israel. They were the highest of the highest you could go. So, of course, when Jesus came, they were under Roman occupation. Jews didn't have a king. They didn't have a ruler, except for Rome, of course. They were oppressed by Rome. But Rome would allow the places they took over to have their own jurisdiction to a point. They would let them rule themselves. They would let them practice their own religions. They didn't care about any of that stuff unless it interfered with your worship of Caesar. But anyway, so Israel got to keep their Sanhedrin. And so this group of 70 men, they were like the rulers of Israel. Like any problems, any law problems, any problems of justice that need to be taken care of, they would bring them to the Sanhedrin, and whatever decision they made, that's what went. I mean, they had more authority really than our Supreme Court, because they were essentially ruling Israel as much as they could with Roman occupation. But anyway, in the last 5 years, some of the Orthodox Jewish religious leaders in Israel has formed the Sanhedrin again. So they've formed the Sanhedrin again. I don't know if they have 70 members yet, but they're trying to get to that point. And they are meeting every single week, talking about judicial matters and everything else. Now they're having opposition, a lot of opposition in Israel, because a lot of people in Israel are not Orthodox and they're not religious at all, whatsoever. They don't want to be, because they know this is just going to cause problems. Because what are they going to try to do? They're going to try to get the temple back, because that's their main concern. We'll see. There's the Temple Institute. There's the Temple Institute. This is a group of men, but it's really run and founded by these men, the Sanhedrin, these rabbis. These are all rabbis, the highest rabbis in the land. And so their essential goal is going to be to get the temple rebuilt. And so in the last 5 years, I would say, what is this year? So 2018, I guess. Maybe 2018, maybe even sooner than that. I don't know. They haven't been going long. Now, this ain't the first attempt of the Sanhedrin since 1948, but this is the latest attempt, and this one looks like it's going to stay, because these men are meeting every single week, and they're especially talking about the Temple Mount, and they're especially talking about getting the temple rebuilt. And I should have already drawn this, but I'll go ahead and draw it right here. Again, this is a terrible drawing. That looks nothing like it. But that's Israel, of course. Of course, y'all know that. And again, this one is going to be a little different than the other ones, because this one, of course, was May 14, 1948. Israel was founded again. Israel became a nation again. But this was essential for all the rest of this. And by the way, it's just fascinating to me, that verse in Isaiah, it's 66:8. And God is saying, he's talking to Isaiah, he's saying, can a nation, can a whole nation of people be born in one day? And he said, yes, it can, and it will. And in one single day, a whole nation was born. May 14th, 1948, in one day, a whole nation was born. That's what God was talking about in Isaiah 66, by the way. All right, let me continue. Let's see. Again, I'm just going to draw some men. Give them some little hats. So here we have the Levitical priest, and a lot from these people, from the Sanhedrin and from the Temple Institute, which the Sanhedrin and the Temple Institute, these are the Orthodox religious Jews of Israel. They are really pushing for the temple. They're really pushing to get back to worshiping God as they're supposed to. But they have gotten 1,200, I think I've talked about this before, 1,200 Levitical priests, Levites, Jewish men with Levitical heritage, and they have trained 1,200 men. They've trained 1,200 people in different aspects of the priesthood, every single aspect. They've trained them in the music. There's going to be just like everything you see in the Scriptures, everything you see in Leviticus. There's going to be one group of Levites that will play the music for the temple. They've trained a certain number of them in the art of sacrifice. They showed them how in the ancient ways they did the sacrifices to the animal, because they're going to reinstate that. They've trained them in certain of the Levitical tribe was in charge of lighting the incense every day and keeping the oil inside, or the incense involved, and then the lampstand, that was the oil. One group is going to be in charge of the whole temple. In other words, one group of Levites will have to maintain and keep everything, all the oil, everything maintained, everything cleaned, all the blood cleaned out from the sacrifices, and the incense got to be going 24 hours a day. It can never go out. You can't bring fire from the outside after it's lit, so it has to continually on the altar, on the incense of altar. It can't stop. And you remember when Aaron's sons, when God killed them because they brought in strange fire. They brought in fire from the outside. That fire was to never go out. If the fire goes out and you go outside and get fire, you're bringing in strange fire. Because actually, in the original temple, let me go back and tell you why that is. In the original temple, that the altar, God started the fire. God started the fire. And so that fire that God started was to be an everlasting flame, to never, ever, 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 ever go out. And so if it ever went out and you brought in fire from the outside, that's strange fire. That's not the fire from God. That's not the fire from the temple. That's why he killed Aaron's two sons. But anyway, so we got 1,200 Levitical priests. It's being trained for every aspect of the temple. And that's been going on for, I would say, 5 years. I heard about that, saw a thing about that probably about 2 years ago. But this is intensive training. Like, it's intensive. But they are trained. They're done. Like, they have everything prepared. All these men are ready to go. They know everything that the Scripture tells the Levitical priests to do. All right, so that's 5 years ago. The temple itself, I don't know how to draw that, so I'm just going to draw. It didn't have a A-framed roof, so I'll just draw this, because that's really what it looked like, because it had an upper part too. So we'll say that's the temple. And of course, we know that's not built yet. But I've told y'all and talked about that every single piece of material for the fabrication of the temple is already there and already in place and ready. It's off-site. But within 2 weeks, I would say, that when they decide to do this, and, you know, however this goes with the Arabs, they're going to have to figure all that mess out. But within 2 weeks, they could have the temple up. Because they have every single stone cut, everything is done. All they got to do is come to the site and put it together. So that's not happened yet, but could happen in just a moment. And then we have all the I'm just going to draw, man, I ain't even going to draw that. I'm just going to draw a few things. This is what it looks like, but it... That is terrible, terrible, terrible. Yeah, it's a menorah. Okay, so anyway, so this is just three, but this is probably the main three. So the temple, all the temple accessories, and so you can go in Leviticus and you can see every single thing that God told them to make, and specifically exactly what to make it out of, and what not to overlay with gold, what not to overlay with silver, what's going to be made out of pure silver, and how exactly it's to be made, every single exact dimension. It's all right there in Leviticus. And there's over 60 accessories. Now these are the three main ones. The lampstand. Now this lampstand, this menorah, everybody's seen a menorah, you know. This is almost 7 feet tall. And it's solid gold. Solid gold. The table is shewbread. This is the table. And the table is wood, and then it's overlaid with solid pure gold. And then it's got these things, I don't even know what they're called, but they're on the ends of the table, and there's like six of these things, and it's solid gold. It's gorgeous. So that's the table of shewbread. If you remember, every single week, at the beginning of the week, or at the end of the week, that Aaron, his sons, or the Levitical tribe after them, every week would have to go into the holy place, not the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant is, but the holy place. So in the holy place, there's the table of shewbread. There is the candle, the menorah. Yeah, what is it called? The lampstand. The lampstand, the table of shewbread, and the altar of incense. And so that's the three main things in the holy place, not the Holy of Holies. And so every Friday, the Levitical, a group of Levitical tribes, priests this is their job. They would bake bread. They would break 12 loaves of bread, and for the 12 tribes of Israel. And they would put it on this table, and they would leave it for 6 days. And then, on the seventh day, they'd break all new bread, come out, get the old loaves of bread, and they got to take those home and eat them. That was their food. But this, again, was an everlasting symbol that God told them to keep the bread. I will always feed Israel. I would always provide for Israel. It was an everlasting show of a covenant. And so, and then the altar of incense, of course, that would be right in front of the veil, and it was to be burning constantly. And actually, when on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the high priest would have to go in here behind the veil into the Holy of Holies, and first he had to purify himself, and then he would take the altar of incense and fill it with smoke before he would go in there, because the light of the glory of God was so bright, and he would cover his face, and he would have the blood on his thumb, and he would go in there, and he would mark the post with his thumb and the blood of the Ark of the Covenant. And so that was the Day of Atonement. That was he was offering the blood for an atonement for the sins of all the people of Israel. once every year. That was the atonement. It was the Day of Atonement. And so that was the meeting place between man and God. And so there was over 60 accessories within, and I'm talking about silverware, everything. Not just these three main things, everything. The altars, there's 2 altars, everything. Well, let's see. That, within the last, I would say 10 years, the Temple Institute has completed every single item. Every single item, except the Ark of the Covenant. Because the Ark of the Covenant, I believe, with all my heart, they know exactly where it's at. I believe they know where the Ark of the Covenant is, and I believe they'll use the original when they build the temple again. But the Ark of the Covenant has been gone since 550 BC. So the Ark of the Covenant wasn't in there when Jesus was there. The Ark of the Covenant was already gone. When the Babylonians invaded, it disappeared. It was never told if it was stolen or if it was hidden. And I'm sure y'all have heard the story, and I believe it. You don't have to believe it. And there's a lot of different stories out there about the Ark of the Covenant. But the Ethiopian in Aksum, if y'all have ever heard that, the Church of St. Mary of Zion, they claim that they've had it for 14 centuries. And that there is listen to this, there is a priest, a monk, and he is a virgin. He has to be a virgin. He's a virgin monk, and he sits in front of that door. No man has ever been in there. He sits in front of that door till he dies. They bring you food, water, and everything else. But that's his job. That's his lifelong job, is to sit there and guard that door. So anyway, I don't know whether it is or whether it ain't. It's really irrelevant to what I'm talking about. But every single item, the menorah, the table of shewbread, the altar of incense, every single item. And these are, they're on display. You can see them. I'll show you pictures here in a little bit. I mean, it's mind-boggling, because these are not replicas. They're not models. These are made to the exact specifications of the Scriptures, not for display, but for use. They just exactly as Moses and those craftsmen did in the Old Testament, these men painstakingly for years studied the highest Jewish scholars in the world, and artisans have worked on these for years, and they've completed all 60 pieces. Now, what does all this mean? Well, a minute ago I said, and this was in the last 5 years, I believe, that they finished these things. But think about this. Look at this. Look. We're in Revelations. Now, I popped out of Revelation, but I didn't really pop out of Revelations, because everything we're reading in Revelations, this has to happen first. And it ain't no coincidence. Look at this. 2022. All of a sudden they have this knowledge. Oh, it's the crimson worm, and we do it this way. 2022. 2020. Oh, we get these mollusks, and we crush them, but we have to do it this way. 2018, the Sanhedrin's formed. 2022, oh, here's the red heifers we've been looking for 80 years. We need a Levitical priest that's trained in all the arts of the Old Testament. Oh, here we are. We've trained them, and we've got them prepared in the last 5 years. All this is happening rapidly. Rapidly. It's like a puzzle being put together as quick. What is our gauge for the coming of Christ? What is our gauge for the end of the world? What is our gauge for the Antichrist? What is our gauge for all of biblical prophecy? This right here, Israel. We are to be looking at Israel. When when we see, Jesus said, when you see these things happen, know that the time is nigh. Look up, for your redemption draweth nigh. And so, another thing, the Ark of the Covenant, I was talking about that a little bit, and I've run out of room. But ain't that fascinating? That's amazing. Just within the last 10 years, look what's happened. Like everything is ready. Everything is prepared. They've been working on this stuff forever, but all of a sudden, all of it just comes together. And you see that throughout the scriptures. Whenever you see stuff come together like this, your ears better perk up, because something's getting ready to happen. Something's getting ready to happen. But I was also thinking about the Ark of the Covenant, and that was the box, and then the lid, which is the mercy seat, and it had the cherubims with the wings coming in to each other, almost touching. And then, the Shekinah glory of God would sit in the middle. This was the mercy seat. But think about this. Think about the representation of the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant. Just the name of it. The Ark of the Covenant. What is the covenant of the New Testament? It's in his blood. It's Christ. Christ is the new covenant. He said the new covenant is in my blood. He says my body is the bread, my blood is the wine. And so the Ark of the Covenant is wood. So this is the old covenant. This was the law. The Ark of the Covenant was made out of wood. And that signified, well, I'm not going to say it did, but I really believe it did. The wood signifies Christ's humanity. He was a human. And then it was overlaid in absolute pure gold. And that was Christ's divinity. And then what did you have inside the Ark of the Covenant? You had the two tablets. You had the manna. And you had Aaron's rod with the budded almond on it. So the tablets, we know, is the Ten Commandments, is the law. So inside the vessel, inside this covenant, was this law, manna, and Aaron's rod. Well, Christ, if he is the new covenant, and the wood is his humanity, the gold is his divinity, and the law he kept. The law was written upon Christ's heart. He not only had the law in his heart, he knew the whole law of God, but he performed and he fulfilled the whole law of God. The manna, what is that? Bread from heaven. What did Christ say he was? He was the bread of life. He said, my flesh is blood, or my flesh is bread. Eat my flesh. He said, eat my flesh and live. Drink my blood. It's the blood of the new covenant. So inside of Christ, he is the bread of life. His flesh is the bread of life. And what is his flesh? And it was the Word of God, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. So the flesh of Christ is the Word of God. So inside of Christ is the law in his heart, written upon his heart, and he fulfilled the law. Inside of Christ, his flesh is the bread of life. He is the bread of life. He is the Word made flesh. And then Aaron's rod. So what was Aaron's rod? Think about that for a minute. What happened to Aaron's rod? It budded. Aaron's rod was essentially a walking stick. It was a dead limb. That's all it was. That's all it was. This was just a dead almond branch that Aaron would walk around with. God caused Aaron's rod to bud from a dead branch. That's resurrection. That's bringing life out of something that's dead. And of course, Christ, being the covenant, the new covenant, being fully human, the wood, being fully divine, the gold, having the law written upon his heart and also fulfilling the law, bringing the bread of life and offering his flesh, the bread, for our lives, for us to eat on, to live forever, to have eternal life. But he's also the resurrection. That he was dead like Aaron's rod, and now he's alive again and forevermore. Ain't that amazing? So you think about the Ark of the Covenant like that next time you look at it. Let's see if there's anything else. Well, I think that's all. But anyway, so what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Well, I'm not counting that because that was a long time ago. But at least 7 things that's happened within the last 10 years that none of that 50 years ago was possible. None of that even seemed possible. How can you find a 14, 15, 1600-year-old, both of these really, a 1600-year-old process to get this dye out of these creatures that they didn't even know about the creatures until like the last 15 years. But that's what I was telling in Bible study. I said, you know, if you don't see what's happening, like Christ is coming back. Like we are, the puzzle pieces, Israel's coming together, Antichrist is going to be right behind it. And I was talking about it at work today, actually. I was showing the guys some of the pictures. I'm going to show some of y'all, but I said, you know, I lost my train of thought. Oh, yeah, we was talking about the temple. He said, well, yeah, but what about the temple? He said, what are they going to do about because you know the Dome of the Rock, the mosque is on the Temple Mount. And he said, what are they going to do about that, though? He said, the Muslims are there, and it'll start World War III, which it probably would. Except, what's the Antichrist going to do first, right off the bat? And I told you, this temple could be thrown, because every stone is done. This could be put together just in a matter of weeks. But what is the Antichrist? What's the first thing he's going to do? The first thing we find about in Scriptures, we went over it in Revelations, the first thing the Antichrist is going to do is sign a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. What is their number one contention? Is this temple. That's Benjamin Netanyahu, most of all of the Orthodox, religious Jews. They're not content because they can't worship God. Can you imagine as Christians if we couldn't pray to Christ, if we couldn't do anything, if we couldn't worship God unless we had this building here, and then if it was destroyed and we've been waiting for thousands of years to build it back and we can't worship God till we get this building built? They have such a desperation in their souls, like this is their life's ambition. They'll die for this. They do not care. They will die for this. So when the Antichrist comes, and I was thinking about this today, and this is just speculation on my part. But what better peace treaty than for the Antichrist to make a brokerage deal with the Arabs, say, okay, you can build your temple. Sign right here. I mean, that would kick off after the rapture and everything's going crazy and the Jews are all upset, the Arabs are all upset, and then the Antichrist comes in and says, we got to get control of this world, we got to get control of this thing. And he says, we're going to have to have peace. We're going to have peace in the Middle East. Y'all have heard that silly quote, but it's true. The Bible tells us there's going to be a 7-year peace treaty with Israel. And to me, that's going to be the key point. That's going to be the number one factor is the temple. And so we're seeing everything is setting the stage for the Antichrist. And let me see. I forgot I did have something. I'll just read this. This is just some stuff I found last night. So another recent discovery of the Temple Institute has been the revival of the science of producing biblical crimson. So this is about the crimson worm. This dye, so this is actually discovered by the Biblical Institute. This dye was used in the garments of the high priest, and I'm going to actually show you a picture because they not only built the utensils and the menorah and the table of shewbread and everything else, they got all the garments. They even got the high priest's garment, and it is crimson. It is gorgeous, and it's made from that crimson worm. And so it says this dye was used in the garments of the high priest, the parashit, the massive curtain that separated the Holy of Holies from the holy place in the temple, and was an ingredient used in the mixture combined. Now this is why they couldn't, even if they had this crimson worm, they still could not have made the veil, or they wouldn't have done any of that, because they had to have the red heifer. So here's why. And so, and it was an ingredient used in the mixture combined with ashes of the red heifer. So they had to mix the ashes of the red heifer with the crimson worm to make that dye for the purification of the temple and of the priest. They can't do any of it unless they have the red heifer. Mixture combined with the ashes of the red heifer. Professor Zohar Amar of Bar Ilan University discovered that the eggs of the Tolat Shani crimson worm found in modern Israel would produce the crimson dye. There are no mere that's about all the utensils. It says there are these are no. This is about these here in the Temple Institute. These are no mere models or replicas. They have been created for use in the third temple, which could possibly be constructed within our lifetime. Every dazzling piece in the Institute collection is made of pure gold, silver, copper, and authentic materials. Each one provides a rich context for understanding the various utensils, golden bowls, jugs for sanctified oil, the golden altar. The clothing and the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, are on display. I'll show you a picture of that. Also, the musical instruments. They actually recreated the original musical instruments that were in the original temple. The lyre that David played. It's exactly to the specifications. It's amazing. This includes silver-plated shofars. Y'all know the shofars, they blow them horns. They're completely silver-plated, just like where they were in the original temple. And for the feast days, they're gold-plated shofars for blowing on Rosh Hashanah, literally head of the year, the Jewish New Year. On the first day of the 7th month, you are to have the day of Sabbath rest, a sacred assembly commemorated with trumpet blast, and that's where they get the silver trumpets. Silver trumpets are used for public prayer, or no, that's the gold. Silver trumpets used for public prayer, and multiple lyres also line the walls. The lyres have 10 strings based upon the verse in Psalms. The menorah, table of shewbread, altar of incense, and the golden altar. August 2023, Rabbi Mir Yaakov Hakek Halavi, goodness, and the 12-member leadership council. So this is the Sanhedrin. There's 12 main leaders of this Sanhedrin. There's more than that, but they only publicly show 12. Because the rest of them don't want to be identified right now, because even other Jews want to kill them, because they don't want the Sanhedrin. They don't want the temple. A lot of the Jews don't want the temple back because they know if they start building the temple, the Arabs are going to attack them. It's going to be World War III. And so a lot of the Jews just don't want to deal with that. Most Jews, honestly, are, I don't want to say most Jews, but a lot of Jews are atheists. A lot of modern-day Jews, they hold the traditions of their family. They hold the tradition of Jewish. They'll still do Passover. They'll still do, what do they call it when they grow up? The mitzvahs and all that. They'll do all the Jewish things. They learn the Jewish prayers, but most of them are honestly atheists. They don't even believe in God anymore. And it's because there's no temple. And so the rest of them who are religious, that's why they're so desperate for the temple, because they can't worship God. Can you imagine being separated from God? They're desperate. And I don't blame them. If I really thought that, I would be over there with them, crying day and night. You look at the Wailing Wall. There's a 24-hour camera pointed at the Wailing Wall, and 24 hours a day you'll see those Jewish men in front of that wall praying and sticking papers inside the cracks of the wall. That's the original temple. And 24 hours a day, they are praying for Messiah to come back, praying for Messiah to come back, praying for Messiah to come back. Within larger, and that's what they think. They think once they get the temple done, and they get the red heifer, and they think Messiah is going to come back and, with them on the red heifer deal. It's the larger court ordained rabbis in the general ranks of the Sanhedrin that grows steadily in the ongoing development of the full Sanhedrin Katana, small Sanhedrin to lead the Sanhedrin. All right. So anyway, that's all I got besides pictures. So I don't have that many pictures. I just got a few. But I will show. This is fascinating. So I try to. I'll tell you what. I'm getting. This will be easier one day, and I could teach this whole thing with actual pictures instead of having to draw all that garbage up there. But I think I'm going to get me one of those projectors, and it has a screen, and I can actually run it off my phone and show actual pictures. That'd be so much better. But this is the copper vessels. Copper vessels on the left in the Abuv, three-tiered stand used for roasting the omer on the Passover. The middle containers coal for roasting. So this is where they keep the coals and the omers. The omer is what they baked for Passover, the flatbread, unleavened bread. So that's the copper vessels. Let me turn this off.